All right, everyone, we're back in action here. So the only person we're missing today, I guess, is a tech professional here. But, anyway, we've got it working here. So some of you may have heard this, may have done all the paperwork for your youth, but this disability tax credit is available to individuals with prolonged impairments. So certainly if it's not something you're familiar with, hopefully after this presentation, you take a deep look at it and get the paperwork filled out. The medical practitioner would complete the paperwork, and it's a T2201, so you can find it pretty easily on CRA's website if you just Google that. And it's possible for for the physician to basically retroactively approve it. So if you don't already have one in place, they can indicate when the impairment began, and then the Canada Revenue Agency can actually go back and provide refunds for up to 10 years previous. Okay. It's a non-refundable credit. What that means is if the person that can claim the credit has no income taxes payable, there is no real benefit to the credit itself. However, a supporting family member can claim the credit on behalf of the individual with the impairment. So if the youth has no income, well, a parent or whomever's taking care of the individual can claim the credit on their behalf. There's part of the DTC paperwork would indicate to whom the credit can transfer to. Okay. You'll see here, if you can use the full credit, it's quite lucrative in terms of tax savings. So about $1,900 for an adult individual and $3,000 for a child. Okay, and these credits are the same, whether it's the individual with the impairment or the supporting family member that is making the claim on their behalf. Most importantly, having this DTC approved with the CRA is kind of the key to some of the other tax benefits that they might be eligible for. So we'll look at some of the medical expenses and then also this registered disability savings plan, RDSP. You need to have an approved DTC certificate from the CRA before you can actually open that account. So usually when it comes from an income tax perspective, the first thing you're always going to do is, go get your physician to fill out that T2201 form. And once that's submitted to CRA and approved, then you can look at, your next steps in terms of, this RDSP and some other planning. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the medical expense tax credits, but I wanted to make some specific comments about, providing assistance to youth and other individuals with impairments. So once again, the medical expense tax credit is a non-refundable credit. So if you don't pay any tax, then this credit is not going to be helpful to you. So if you have no income, generally speaking, the medical expense credit will not be beneficial. There's an exception if you are employed, and then there's a refundable component. But the good news is if you're paying for expenses on an individual that has an impairment, well, you can actually claim those expenses, assuming that individual is dependent on you. Okay. So you can claim those medical expenses on your tax return, even though they are for someone else. For children under 18 years of age, there's this, in both cases, there's a 3% net income threshold. And all that means is basically if 3% of your net income is kind of thrown out as medical expenses, and it's only to the extent you have expenses in addition to that amount that are deductible. So this kind of gets rid of anyone that has, really small expenses, so that they're not, CRA typically asks for this information as part of the tax filing, so they don't have to deal with people claiming, $100 or $200. So depending on your income or the income of the individual with the impairment, you may or may not be able to make this claim. The good news is when the individual with the impairment turns 18, you look at their income rather than your income, okay? So you may not be able to claim any medical expenses for yourself because your net income is too high and your threshold's too high. But if your individual with impairment that you're supporting has no income, well, you can claim all of the medical expenses on your tax return to the extent you pay income taxes. Okay.
You just say that point again, please? So if they're 18, if you're an adult and they have no income,
Yeah,
can you
so,
just repeat that? part?
so if the individual with the impairment is 18 years of age or older, the net income that's relevant for this test is the income of that individual, so the adult, okay? So if they have no income, then you can claim the medical expenses on your tax return, all of them, without regard to this limit, okay? Because this limit is, if you did the calculation, it would be 0. And so if you had $5,000 of medical expenses for that individual, you would claim the full $5,000 on your return, yeah. So it's to whomever pays the expense, okay? And usually in these cases, it's going to be the supporting family member that actually pays the expense, okay? So the key point there is you may not be able to claim your own medical expenses, you know, if you go to the physiotherapist or the, you know, massage therapist, that type of thing. But you may still be able to claim all of the expenses for your child or the individual you're supporting, okay? And this really depends on their age. If they're under 18, then you look at the family net income, which is generally the parents' 3% net income, okay? So depending on the medical expenses you claim, the Canada Revenue Agency may require certain receipts or material. So in certain cases, they need a prescription from the physician or a certification in writing from the physician as well, or that approved disability tax credit form. They may also require none of that and just the tax receipt or the receipt from, you know, the medical practitioner. CRA has a good website. You can just type in medical expenses, Google CRA, and you can kind of like search any expense that you incur to see if they've provided commentary as to whether or not that's a deductible expense, and also what types of supporting documents you need, okay? In my experience, CRA will ask for supporting documents for most medical expense claims that are significant. So certainly anything over $5,000, they're going to ask you for support. And usually how it works is you would file your tax return with the medical expenses that you believe are deductible. And then about 2 months later, you'll get a letter from CRA and they'll say, hey, please, you know, support your medical expenses, send us all the receipts, send us the prescriptions and the, you know, the doctor's notes and this, that, and the other thing. So it's good to be prepared, you know, before that letter comes, because otherwise you're kind of scrambling to get those documents. And certainly sometimes it can be difficult to see a physician within the, you know, the required period to respond to those letters, okay? Similarly to that disability tax credit form, if there's anyone in this room thinking like, hey, there might be medical expenses I could have deducted, you can go back 10 years on your tax return and file an amendment to potentially generate a tax refund. As I said, CRA has a good website in terms of, you know, a list of basically everything that you could possibly, you know, spend in terms of medical expenses. I wanted to highlight some here that I thought were relevant for this group. Some things that, you know, maybe you didn't think about or maybe you already knew. So attendant care, nursing home costs for the individual and their salary, respite care. We talked a bit about that today. So those expenses would generally be deductible. That first line requires that disability tax credit form being approved. Okay, so once again, it's important that we have that disability tax credit approved by CRA. Renovations to the home, bathroom aids, mobility aids throughout the home, even something like a paving your driveway, if it helps someone get in the home, that could be a medical expense. Lift or transportation equipment, if you alter your vehicle to allow a wheelchair to enter that vehicle, something like that could be a medical expense as well. And then walking aids and things like wheelchairs and that kind of thing, okay? This is obviously not an exhaustive list. There's plenty more that you can deduct. Home accessibility tax credit. So these are one of those kind of special tax credits. So $20,000 of eligible expenses can be deducted, and the tax savings are based on 15% of that number. So your maximum tax refund for this credit would be about $3,000. And these are costs similar to the paving the driveway idea that alter the place of residence of the individual with an impairment. And really, the only requirements are that the individual is eligible for that disability tax credit, and then that an eligible individual owns the home. So the supporting family member, if they own the home and, modify it in any way that helps support that individual, those expenses could be deductible on the home accessibility tax credit, okay? And this tax credit can double up with the medical expense tax credit, so you can actually claim them both on the same expense. Some other credits here. So spouse or common law partner amount. So despite the name, this can actually be claimed for an individual that's dependent on you. It applies for an individual that, so the person without the impairment, the supporting family member, if they're single, divorced, or widowed, basically, if they don't have a spouse, they could claim this credit on behalf of their dependent child. Okay. In addition, there's the eligible dependent and the Canada caregiver amount. These are all claimable if there's a dependent in the family. And you'll see based on different criteria, there are different credit amounts. So it gets a bit complicated depending on your relationship and the age of the individual with the impairment. But usually something you want to look out for, especially if you're kind of preparing your own tax return. These are some of the things, maybe they just don't jump out at you if you're preparing it yourself.
Both of those or just?
In certain cases, you can claim both of those amounts. So these two at the top, and then you can also claim the spouse and common law partner amount, assuming, you don't have a spouse. So you could potentially claim them all. Registered Disability Savings Plan, RDSP. So first thing, you need to be approved for the disability tax credit. That's the T2201 that I keep talking about. And these plans are designed to assist individuals, obviously, save for their long-term well-being. There's a $200,000 lifetime contribution limit. Okay, so that's the most that can be put into a plan for any one beneficiary. So even if there are two plans open, it wouldn't be 400,000. It's just 200,000 for that one individual. In terms of this plan specifically, contributions are not tax deductible. So it's not like an RSP where you claim tax deduction, but the real benefits are within the plan itself. So there are government grants that are automatically deposited into the account for the individual. Some of them are based on income and some of them are based on contributions. And I'll get into that in a minute. And in addition, similar to something like an RSP, the investments grow on a tax deferred basis. What that means is no one pays tax on what's happening within that RDSP until we take the money out. Okay, so it can grow tax deferred, which usually allows us to kind of compound our growth over a long period of time. Family members can assist in terms of contributing to those plans and also helping set up those plans. And I'll get to that in a minute as well. In terms of what's taxable and who pays the tax on this growth within the plan and the bonds and that kind of thing, it's the beneficiary. So the individual with the impairment would have to pay tax on the amount. Generally speaking, they can earn a certain amount of income without paying any tax at all. So long as the bonds and the grants and the income that was earned within the plan is not too significant, it's unlikely that the beneficiary, being the one with the impairment, would ever have to pay any income tax. Okay. The original contribution, so if you contributed the full $200,000, that can come out tax-free. So it's really just the growth and the government bonds that we pay tax on. And like I said, in most circumstances, there's probably not going to be any tax paid on the withdrawals. Okay. Eligibility for other federal benefits and then the provincial things like ODSP. Generally speaking, the RDSP and its assets are excluded specifically. So obviously a good thing because we want to make sure we can maintain those benefits. In terms of the government grants and how to kind of maximize the benefit of the RDSP. So there's two grants. The first one is the Canada Disability Savings Grant. This is a grant of up to $3,500 annually, and you only get it to the extent you make contributions to the plan. So if no one makes a contribution in a year, there wouldn't be any of this particular grant provided. Okay. when you make contributions, you'll see there's kind of a chart. Hopefully that's not too small, probably is, but depending on the income of the individual will determine the amount that the government puts into the plan. And the income that's tested basically is the family income, okay? So for someone under 18, the family income is going to usually include the parents, okay? For someone that's over 18, the family income typically just includes the spouse. So in a lot of cases, once the youth turn into an adult, it's at that time we'll be able to kind of maximize these benefits. However, you'll see kind of like the lifetime limit's about 70,000 and the annual limit is 3,500. So after 20 years of contributions, you'll kind of maximize your benefit there. So, you know, even if you start 10 years from now, when your child is, 25, you'll still be able to maximize the benefits by age 49, assuming the maximum contributions can be made. I'll read out the bottom here, but basically if the family net income is below 106,000, okay, then on the first $500 of contributions, the government will match 3 for 1. So basically you'll get $1,500 if you contribute 500. And then on the next $1,000, you'll get $2 for every dollar. So you'll get an extra $2,000. Okay, so if the family net income is below 106,000, that's when you can get the maximum annual grant, which is $3,500. If the family income is above $106,000, then it's a 1-for-1 match up to $1,000. So the maximum grant you can get is $1,000. So depending on the income of the family, generally speaking, assuming you can make the maximum contributions, you should be able to maximize this credit during the lifetime of the beneficiary. The Canada Disability Savings Bond is the other government grant. It's up to 1,000 annually and no contribution is required. So generally speaking, it's probably best to just open the RDSP account. And then to the extent the government does their calculations and the net income of the beneficiary is below a certain threshold, they'll just put the $1,000 into the account. Okay, so even if you can't fund the account, it still probably makes sense to open the account. Okay, you can open the account at most financial institutions, so you can just walk into your bank and ask them how to set the account up. Some of the smaller ones may not have the RDSP available. In terms of this bond, the income threshold's relatively low, so it's about 34,000. And that's the same calculation in terms of family net income. So generally speaking, once the youth turns 18, if they have no other income and no spouse, they would be entitled to the $1,000 bond every year until they reach the maximum, which would be after 20 years, okay? Who can open an RDSP? So Rob had commented about guardianship applications and that kind of thing. As of right now, the CRA allows a spouse or common law partner of the individual with the impairment, a parent or a sibling, to open the account on their behalf, okay? That as of right now, and I don't know what the government's going to do after December 31st, 2026, but it's possible that after that date, that only basically someone legally authorized to act on behalf of that individual could open this account. These were the rules many years ago, and then they thankfully got a bit more lenient in terms of who can open the account. So I would say, if you're expecting a guardianship application is going to be necessary, you're definitely going to want to open this account prior to December 31st, 2026, because after that, it's possible that you won't be able to open the account without that guardianship application. And if the individual with the impairment is not capable or their capability is in doubt, they wouldn't be able to open the account themselves, okay? This is the last slide I have for you today. It's just kind of a very high level estate planning comment for caregivers. So as we know, the ODSP is asset tested and income tested. There's a $40,000 asset test, so it's relatively small depending on, how much financing you want to provide the individual either as a gift or after you've passed away. So one of the things we want to make sure is that either our gift or our request after we pass away isn't going to impact these benefits, okay? If the gifted request is not significant, so like under that $40,000 threshold, or will be used for one of these excluded assets, then you might be okay. But in most other cases, we would probably want to be looking at something like a Henson Trust, which is just a very specific type of trust to avoid an asset being included in the ODSP asset test for that individual. If you are doing a Henson Trust, further to Rob's comments about the wills, like you definitely want professional legal advice to create this trust appropriately, because there can be, things within that trust that could put you offside, and then it would no longer be a properly created Henson Trust. If you do create it correctly, then the individual can continue to benefit from ODSP. Okay, so it's very important if you're leaving large sums of money, or you intend to, or you're drafting your wills, and you're saying, I need to leave this money aside for the person I support. Well, you want to be thinking about considering these other types of structures to make sure that their benefits are not impacted. That's all I've got for you today. If there are any questions. Yeah, in the back.
Just quickly, I know like when I applied for the BTC for my son, there was an expiry date. And I just wanted to mention out to people, like if you're not aware of the expiry date, please check. CRA does not send you a reminder. So it will just expire and you're not aware that it's expired. So please, for some of us, ours will be expiring when our child turns 16 or 18. So please have a look at that certificate. I don't know if they've changed it, if they're now reminding people, but I know that's what I was told.
Not that I'm aware of. So, I mean, it's a very good point. So just monitor that, and you can get another one filled out before it expires and then resubmit it to the Canada Revenue Agency so that there's no lag between when they get approved. Once again, if it does expire and you didn't know, you can go to the physician and get them to, reinstate it retroactively. There's a bit more paperwork to fill out to get the CRA to approve that. But generally speaking, so long as it's within that 10-year period, you should be fine. They do sometimes approve them indefinitely. I would think it would depend on the age of the individual. But perhaps once they become an adult, the CRA will approve that disability tax credit indefinitely, so you wouldn't need to get it renewed. Anyone else? Great.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm one of the social workers with Tidy Care Team. I'm currently what stands between you and getting home, so I will be concise, which is not my best strong suit. First of all, I think we just all take a big collective deep breath, because there's been a lot kind of coming at everyone. And so I think we just all check the shoulders, see if they're elevated up to the top. Oh, that's me. No, that's fabulous. Yeah, this is a lot of information. So just, I think, be gracious and kind with yourselves as you sort of take it all in and let it settle over the next days, weeks, months. Inevitably, there'll be questions and space to get those answers. So just want to check in on everyone's insides. That's a weird way of putting it, but it's late. So again, wouldn't be a presentation by a social worker without a little bit of a resource. Journey to Wellness is this adorable, cartoony kind of vibe. She does posts on Instagram. So this is just your 4 square breathing. You inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold again. There's science behind it. You can look it up later. Oh, also, I like visuals. So this little bear is saying, can you fix it? Pointing at his broken heart. And the bunny says, no, I can't fix that. I'm sorry, but I'll help you hold it. So my hope for everyone in this room is that you have some bunnies in your life that can help you hold some of this really hard stuff. And maybe your social workers at CHEO or RNH are your bunnies. Maybe you've got friends or family that is like, no, friends that are like family. But I hope you all have some bunnies. So I wanted to just highlight a little bit about anticipatory grief, because is there, maybe raise your hand, is there anyone in this room that is feeling a lot of grief about the thought of leaving the pediatric health system? Yeah, yeah, fear, grief, like name it. It's probably present with us in this room. So I just really want to name that because, of course, it's all you've known. For so many of you, I'm sure you've had varied positive, challenging, and everything in between experiences with the healthcare system. But something we know about the pediatric system is that there's a lot of padding around you, right? There's a lot of people you can call. There's a lot of services that exist that unfortunately don't exist in the adult world in the same way. So for anyone in this room who's followed by pediatric palliative care, that's one of them, right? So for some of the families in this room or others you might speak to, that's a huge loss, right? To have a team that you can call up, it's a huge loss. I think also I want to name it for your kids and youth, right? It's another loss. They know this building, or this building, they know the buildings. They feel hopefully comfortable or safe here, right? And so I think it's important to acknowledge and maybe make some space with your kids and youth to process some of that too. How many of you are exhausted a lot of the time, right? And then you're hearing all of this stuff and there's more to do, right? It's that there's more. So I just want to name it. You are not alone. Everyone in here is carrying some of that. And again, I go back to the bunny. I hope that there are some bunnies out there for you that can help you hold some of that. So again, honoring your needs as parents and caregivers. There could be so many things that come up for you when it comes to thinking about transitioning. So for many of you, that might be maybe some feelings of joy that your child's in a position to be transferring into the adult system, right? For some of our families, they may have lived with a lot of uncertainty and not known what that might look like. Fear. There's probably a lot of fear. What's coming next? What's going to be there for us on the other side of this healthcare world? There might be some worries about outliving your child that have now changed to, or sorry, might be worries that you would outlive your child, and now those worries might shift to what happens if I die before my child, right? There's some of these things that have shifted. The big one I hear is, am I behind? Should I have done something? And for the most part, there's time to do a lot. And for some, uniquely, I'll speak to the families we follow in palliative care. For some or much of your child's life, you might have heard that they won't age into the adult system. And so you were told to live in the moment and enjoy what time you have and be there with them. And now it's like, holy moly, I now need to look at what does this look like to transition? And everyone's telling me something so different. And so that's a huge piece to honor and acknowledge. Do I have the stamina to maintain this pace of caregiving? Right? There's so many pieces. So all of these are things that I think are important to highlight and things that we can help support you with. There are a lot of incredibly gifted folks out there to help talk through some of these various things. Any I'm missing? Like big ones that I'm missing that anyone wants to name? So I found this graph, which is pretty small, so we'll send it out, but it's essentially the 4 core components of a successful transition into adult care. And so I found this on the Canadian Pediatric Society website. And the main one is start transition planning early. So many of you are in that position, right? You're in this room and your child might, still be in their young, before teens, might be in their teens, so you're doing that. Creating an individualized transition plan. Again, something you're doing with your teams, something you're learning more about here. Provide support before transition. So some of that's peer support for your young people. It might be peer support for yourselves. And ensuring ongoing support after transition to adult care. So that's the goal, right? That is the goal. So a question that I've come across that it was born out of the adult palliative care world, but I'm bringing it to peds because I think it's a really lovely and important question to consider either as yourselves, as parents and caregivers, or to talk about and consider with your young people. So the question, and typically it's asked by a healthcare provider to you, but I'm sort of posing it to you to consider. So the question is, what do I need to know about you as a person to give you the best care possible? So some of the things to consider in that is, what are your family, your youth values and beliefs? What's important to you? What are those relationships? What worries and concerns do you have? What qualities are important to share? Roles and responsibility, history and stories. You're all about to embark on a journey where you're meeting a plethora of new people. And I firmly believe that every single person in your unit, and especially the person who we're talking about, deserves to be known, right? They've lived this beautiful, complex life. And I say complex not in the medical sense, but they're complex beings, right? We all are. And so they deserve to be known. And so thinking about this question for yourselves as their parent or caregiver, and also in whatever way they can, helping them contribute to be able to have some of these thoughts as well. So that's from the patient dignity question, dignityandcare.ca. I don't remember the guy's name, but he's, if I'm being recorded, am I being recorded? Mm-hmm. Oh, no copyright, please. So ways to cope with some of these changes. Talking about it, coming to an event like this, seeing that you're not alone, allowing yourself to grieve, naming it. This is grief. There's a lot of grief here. Finding therapeutic support, finding group support, informal peer support, and helpline, which I just found, if all of y'all already know about this, I'm so happy about that. But I just found out about the Ontario Caregiver Organization, which is I called their helpline. So I did confirm that anyone can call. She was a bit surprised when it was me and I was kind of explaining myself. But if you are caring for someone, doesn't matter the age, they have a 24/7 helpline. They have live and recorded webinars specifically about caregiving. Online learning library, vast. I did not have time to look at it all. They have, which I think is super important, resources for young caregivers. So any of you who might have siblings or young people that care. They have group support, peer support, group and one-on-one counseling, caregivers. They have a podcast. Who doesn't these days? I don't. That's a QR code. Yep. And so this is their 24/7 line. I was a bit unclear if it was like a helpline or more of a resource tip line. So still call it crisis line if you are in active and acute crisis, I guess is my gentle disclaimer, which also I don't have a number for, but I very much encourage anyone who is feeling that stress and intensity to access a crisis line as needed. They also have an Instagram. I also wanted to highlight Canadian Virtual Hospice created some caregiver modules. So they have a number of really fabulous modules that have strategies, information for prepping and providing care as illness progresses. So honestly, when I reviewed it, not all of it would be relevant. Some of it might be, but what it was plentiful of was different resources for various scenarios. So it's a little bit of any resources we share, take what fits for you, dump the rest. That's us. If you are followed by the CHEO palliative care team, you are probably familiar with Roger Nielsen House. You've all found your way here today. Thank you for being here. Grab your free pen on the way out. I already took 2.
So you have to fill out your evaluation.
Do that. So if you are followed by this team, the palliative care team, you have access to some of our, or to all of our Roger Nielsen House supports, which is including of our parent support group, which does drop-in and open discussion, specific topics as well, and then as well individual support. So we might talk about transition to adult care, coping with anticipatory grief, talking about diagnoses, etc. And we also can help you find support in the community if it feels like you're needing your own health or mental health support. Research, are we sending slides up? I'll send these out if I can. So these are just a few other resources, free resources for family and caregiver community, which was funded by the Ontario government, the Ontario Caregiver one, and Taking Care of You, self-care for family caregivers. So I will flag that one's American, so it does speak a little bit about some things that might not be relevant, but ta-da.
Any questions? Try to keep it concise. I will introduce Andrea and Norlin at the back, who are my two wonderful colleagues in social work at Roger Mills House. If you haven't had an opportunity to reach